PNF stretching and things that are a little bit more, niche. But like in general, the two basic forms of stretching are active stretching and passive stretching. And your dynamic work and your passive stretching is done with the goal of trying to create an increase in the flexibility of the muscle. So whether you're actually increasing the length of that muscle, more so what you're doing is increasing the decreasing the resistance of that muscle to want to stay at a certain level of flexibility. So when we can sort of take the brakes off and allow that muscle to allow us more range of motion, we're inherently increasing flexibility without necessarily having to increase the length of that muscle. That is usually done at a time far away from your workout because they have shown where this type of stretching done prior to an activity. And it could be like a structured activity like lifting, or it could be a little bit less structured like competing in a sport in a spontaneous type way. That there is a period of recalibration that is needed after doing this because you're disrupting the length-tension relationship of the muscle that causes you to not necessarily be able to rely on these, I've talked about before, stored motor engrams in your mind in terms of this is the pattern for how I swing a golf club, say, and now introducing a little bit of flexibility or added flexibility or range because of the stretching I did before, it takes maybe a hole or two or three to match up again. Oh, this is what he's trying to do, that golf swing thing that I remembered again. Like, it's not remembering that every component, like I have to bend my right wrist back 10 degrees and then I have to bend my elbow and I have to break. Like, your body stores these patterns for motor efficiency. So, and when I have to start matching up that stored pattern with what's feeling new because of the increased range, I can impair performance. And again, it could happen even in a gym workout where you're talking about your first, second set, third set, where maybe the repercussions aren't as big because I'll just do a few extra sets. But in performance, if you screw up your first 3 rounds, you're playing on the PGA Tour and you shoot, you're 6 over after 3, you're done, Mm-hmm. So I think it matters there. As far as the dynamic, so we relegate that, as I mentioned, sort of towards the end of the day when it's not going to impact performance, but even maybe have the additional benefit of creating the feeling of length or the increase or decrease in resistance to this length at a time when I know my body is going to try to tend to heal and heal shorter, never longer, but heal shorter. So if I can introduce a little bit of that extra length or decreased resistance to that length, it's a better time to do it. So I think it promotes a better recovery. If I want to
sorry to interrupt, but so stretching later in the day, because I'm intrigued by this concept of heal shorter.
Yeah.
So part of the healing and recovery process means a shortening of the muscles. This is the tensing up in sleep.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate just a bit on that? And then, sorry to break your flow, but then to continue.
Yeah, no, just basically, what's been shown is that when the repair process, muscular repair from, let's say, strength training during the day, the repair process usually results in a muscle that is slightly shorter rather than increased in length. It's just muscles prefer to sort of, ratchet their way down into that contraction and then, maintain that more comfortable length tension relationship. So when you're sleeping, it tends to, err on the side of shorter rather than longer, when ideally we don't really want that. We want to maintain as much of that length because with more length, we actually have more leverage, right? That muscle has more leverage to contract. If it was all the way contracted, you really can't, obviously we know, generate much force in a muscle that's already maximally contracted. So I think we want to do something that whatever we can, whatever little weapons we have in our arsenal that could allow us to do this prior to sleep. And again, it's just making a conscious choice to do it at a time of the day that makes a little bit more sense. Dynamic stretching is really not done for that purpose of trying to create any type of feeling of act or increasing the potential length, as you said, of the muscle, but more so the readiness of the muscle to perform and increasing, exploring the ends of that range of motion in a more dynamic way. So you're not hanging out there and disrupting that length tension relationship, but just sort of touching the ends of those barriers so that when you feel movement again, it feels looser, it feels more ready. And obviously at the same time, warming up, blood flow, all the benefits we get from just warming up in general. So that's the series you've probably seen a bunch of times, but leg swings and butt kicks and walking lunges and all types of drills.
Toe
touches, all those kind of drills, those active stretching drills, or, lunging with rotations of the upper body to try to get some of the thoracic spine involved too. Those are the drills that people will do prior to training that are both excitatory in terms of just the nervous system, but also helpful for just the general warm up of the body because of the blood flow. But from a muscle readiness standpoint, not impairing the performance while at the same time exploring the increased ranges. Because as you know, the first toe touch you do is not as high as the last toe touch you do.
For me, it doesn't even include the toe.
Right. The shin touch, the
toe
knee touch
attempt.
Right.
Yeah.
So those are going to improve with each subsequent rep. And I think that's what people actually like. When you can see those actual changes from rep 1 to rep 7, you just feel ready. You feel more alert and ready to go in your workout. So the dynamic type of stretching, and I mentioned earlier on, like what I've had to do to sort of increase my warm up focus. I think that's more of what I try to do these days. I try to be a little bit more alert to the fact that my body's not ready. When I was working with Antonio Brown, I remember like he would spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes on all dynamic work. And I've never seen anybody spend that long on their dynamic work, but like he said, he just didn't feel right and ready to go unless he did a lot of that. And I mean, his dynamic stretching routine would be a workout for most everybody. It's crazy how much he did.
These pro athletes are amazing. And you've had the great fortune of working with and improving their abilities. But I can only imagine, because I also imagine he's pretty strong in the gym also.
I mean, it always amazes me, the guys that make it to that level, no matter what sport they do. They're so gifted in everything, like David Wright used to make me laugh all the time with the Mets, because no matter what ping pong, like anything, because of his hand-eye coordination, like anything, great at. Jump rope, I remember he hadn't done a lot of jump rope. And I think jump rope is one of the best things you could do from a conditioning standpoint. It's fairly interesting. It's not just, it's not too harsh on the joints, depending on, even though it's a ballistic move. And he wasn't, I have to admit, if he listens to this, he's going to want to kill me, but I was better at him than at jump roping. One of the only things I could do. And then I gave him about 5 days and he completely blew me out of the water to the point where I could never keep up with him anymore. He made it look effortless. It's like, that's where the athlete in someone comes out. No matter what they pick up, they're good at it. And I think that when you see guys like this in the gym, like their strength levels tend to be pretty damn good, and their abilities, their coordination, their everything just tends to sort of be good at that level, and it sort of amazes me why those guys can go pick up a golf club, and go shoot 72, and having never really played, they're just naturally good at whatever they do.
Yeah, I have a couple, I'm smiling because I have a couple really close friends who did a number of years, several decades in the SEAL teams. And I don't know that their skill level at everything is so high as you're describing for athletes, but their level of competitiveness is beyond.
Right.
I ocean swim with one. There's no chance that I'm gonna, outswim Pat ever. He actually goes back and forth sometimes just to check up on me, which I appreciate. Thank you, Pat. I haven't drowned yet. But in addition to that, we could play horseshoes. And it's like this switch that just flips on, and like he's going to murder me at horseshoes. And a very nice guy, right? In general, they tend to be very nice, but the level of competitiveness is kind of unreal. They're selected for it.
They're trying to beat themselves. They're not even trying to beat you.
That's right. I'm not even in the competition.
You're not even in the competition. You're not even there.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now I won't feel so bad or worse. It's true. It's a remarkable thing. I'm glad you mentioned jump roping. I used to skip rope for warm up for boxing. And those typically like 3-minute rounds or something like that. But I'm glad you brought it up because skipping rope is something that obviously has a cardiovascular component. There's the conditioning component. There's timing, and it is kind of interesting, right? It's frustrating when you don't get it, especially when it whips you on the ear if you're using a proper rope. I'm just curious if you could just give us a quick skipping rope one-on-one. Do you like to see people jumping with both feet and toes? We'll link to a video if there was one and I missed it. Do you like to see people doing high knees? Do you like people basically like shuffling? You want to see people doing double Dutch? What do you want to see people doing over time?
All of the above, maybe not the double Dutch, but all of the above. I mean, I think that's the cool thing about it, right? Like once we sort of master the skill, because for all of us, that first jump with the 2 feet going together is a challenge because you just got to time that rope, you got to time your jump. And then we get bored, as we often do as humans. We get bored with what we can do and we want to take on new challenges. So then it becomes one leg at a time, or then it becomes side to side hops, right? And all of those things are beneficial, I believe, neurologically to enhancing the ability to do the skill as a whole, but also just because I'm such a believer in training in all three planes. So like just doing straight up and down versus now I can do frontal plane side to side motion, and then I can even do small little twists or corkscrews, we call them. It requires a different, you would know more better than I do. It requires different neurological patterns to be able to coordinate that, because you're changing the orientation of your body in space. So it's not just that I'm changing the exercise, but I'm changing how my body interprets that exercise because of what's happening to my body in space. So I love, whatever people wind up doing, but I am amazed. There are people, I just started following this young woman on Instagram who is like, I'll give her a plug. I think it's like Anna Skips or something. And she is ridiculous. Like I watch her and I'm like mesmerized at what she can do with the rope. It's like, it's an extremely athletic endeavor, believe, when it gets to be at that level, in the speed and the precision and the, I think one of the goals that you want to be able to have is to where you're feeling as if you're almost effortlessly dancing without a rope, like where you're just bouncing off of the ball of your foot. And it's an important skill to learn too, whether you go back to run or even jog, right? Just like, more casual running. Learning how to land is so important. One of the drills that people should try is like, try to jump on your heels. So just stand up, pull your toes off the ground, right? And just jump from your heels and land on your heels. You'll feel it in your jaw. You'll literally feel your jaw rattle when you land on your heels. There is no shock absorption capabilities through your heels. Meantime, a lot of people land on their heels a lot when they run. And your body's not built to absorb the forces like the ball of your foot could. It's really built as a spring. And the foot is, to me, as a physical therapist, the foot has always been one of the most amazing. You talk about having bad feet. I have flat feet. It looks like I got flippers if I took my shoes off. Like I'm wearing scuba fins. There is no adaptability of that foot to the surface. When it's completely caved and flattened like that, the job of the foot is to be adaptable. Well, there is some adaptability because it's so floppy, but at the same time, at some point, that critical juncture when you're going to then step through and you need to be able to push off, the foot has to actually changes in the midfoot itself to become a rigid lever, is what they call it. You're going from a mobile adapter to a rigid lever. That rigid lever literally locks up the mid-tarsal joint to become solid so that you can push off of it with leverage. If you lack that capability, all those stresses that are supposed to be borne by the foot go up into the ankle, into the knee, into the hip, into the low back. So learning how to land and start to train your body to experience ground reaction forces the right way is so critical to all other function and all other disability up the kinetic chain. And jumping rope is like one of the best ways to learn how to do that.
Great. I own a jump rope. I love doing it in the morning while I get sunlight in my eyes. It's actually a protocol I picked up from Tim Ferriss, who mentioned, because listeners of my podcast know I'm like a broken record with get sunlight in your eyes, even through cloud cover. It just sets your sleep rhythms and your waking rhythms, yada, yada, on and on. But sometimes it'd be kind of boring for people and I want to get them off their phone. So jumping rope is also just a great way to wake up. So jumping rope can be the cardio workout, the 15 or 30 minutes.
Definitely. And there's sort of that hybrid that we were talking about before of like, you're not necessarily dropping down to the ground and doing burpees, but I just look at it as a more athletic endeavor because of the coordination involved than just simply walking or jogging.
Yeah, and it's not much of a equipment requirement. Very minimal easy. Cost. You could even use a rope or something if you. Although
we even instruct people that they can use no rope and just pretend. And just move the arms, right? And just
truly zero cost.
You're never going to hit the rope, which is good, but at the same time, so you're never going to know if you're doing it wrong, but at least you can move through and get the same benefits through the feet.
I love it. I told myself before sitting down with you today that I wasn't going to focus on specific exercises because there's such a wealth of incredible content that you put out there that people could just put into YouTube or elsewhere and arrive at the proper way to do a chin or a dip or for whatever purpose. But there's one exercise in one particular motion that I'd like to discuss for a moment. because I believe that learning about this cautionary note from you is one of the reasons that I've maintained steady training for 30 years with no major injury, knock on wood. And that's the upright row. One thing that, whether or not people weight train or not,
we censor this podcast? Are you censoring? Do we beep this out or no?
Do you get beef about this?
No, you know what? We always get beef in any social media platform we ever put out, but like, no, I get some from it, but I'm fully prepared to defend myself.
But here's the reason for asking about this. I never really cared much for upright rows. It's not an exercise I tend to do, but one thing that's apparent in all my colleagues and every child I see and every adult I see is that almost everybody is in inward rotation now. So folks think if you stay, I think I learned this from you also, if you stand up straight and then you just point your thumbs out, like a thumbs up, but you're just your hands are down, you're pointing your thumbs straight out. Ideally, they would go straight out. Yeah. Most people, the thumbs are gonna be pointing toward one another because most people are starting to look somewhere between a non-human primate and a melted candle. Yeah. Bent at the hips, et cetera, from too much sitting. We're all sitting, we're in inward rotation. But I learned from you that the upright row compromises some important aspects of our shoulder mechanics and can be actually sort of a dangerous movement in some ways. I'm sure there's a safe way for people to do it. But so I've always made it a point now, on the basis of this advice, to not do upright rows, but I wasn't doing them before, but to really strive for external rotation on things like bench dips, on a number of different things. Whenever I can, I try and go into external rotation, and provided, without looking like an idiot walking around with my palms facing outward. Please tell us about internal, external rotation. The upright row is one aspect of that, but why this is so important, not just for weight training, but as in terms of posture and mechanics and not looking like a melted candle or partially melted candle.
I actually love it. I'm happy to talk about it because I love the shoulder as a joint. I think PTs tend to fall in love with certain areas, and the shoulder is one of the cool areas for me. It's like the foot is, but like the shoulder has the most mobility in the body of any joint, but it's also got the least stability, right? There's always that trade-off of mobility and stability. So your stability comes from, certain muscle groups. And one of the ones the only muscle group that actually externally rotates the shoulder is going to be the rotator cuff, okay? And unless you are devoted to training through external rotation and exercises that are going to externally rotate the shoulder, you're not training that function. And it's so easy for us in everyday life, especially those that aren't training, to not ever really undergo any of those stresses that could be beneficial to counteracting what happens freely and naturally, which is internal rotation. So when you think about the imbalance created just by nature and how we live our lives, internal rotation far, far, far outweighs external rotation. So you need to address it. And the reason why you need to address it is because you need to normalize those biomechanics of the shoulder if you want their long-term health. And one of the functions of the shoulder is to raise our arm up over our head. And if we do that from an internally rotated position, we're going to have a higher likelihood of creating stress inside that joint. Funny thing is, I talked about before, my PT brethren can be somewhat angry these days. I don't know what happened, but fairly angry. They want to discredit the existence of something like shoulder impingement, which I don't know how. I mean, certain studies, look at we all read studies, and studies will say one thing one day and potentially conflict entirely in a different direction. Some studies will point to the non-existence of a shoulder impingement. Meanwhile, we have, thankfully, digital motion X-rays that will literally show the impingement occur in real time, in real function. And that's one of the limitations. I'm off on a tangent here, but like those types of X-rays or that type of fluoroscopy that we have nowadays, like gives us such insight that we never had before, because we're taking static X-rays of someone laying down on a table. When I want to see what happens when you actually raise my arm up over my head in function, and the tools now exist to do that. We see the problems occurring because in order to get normal mechanics and free up the joint maximally inside, you need to externally rotate as you raise the arm up. So if your muscles aren't firing and they're not necessarily as strong as the internal rotation bias that pulls them in, you're asking for trouble every time you do that. Well, This exercise is literally putting you in elevation and internal rotation. And if you were to walk into a PT office and someone said, I think he's got an impingement, will you diagnose him? There's a test called the Hawkins-Kennedy test. And I would put you in the position, I know we're not visible at this point through the podcast, but I'll put you in this position here, where I have your arm elevated and your hand pretty much under your chin, pushing downward on that to create that internal shoulder rotation. Pretty much the exact position that we're in when we're holding a bar in an upright row. Some will say, well, just don't go so high, go only up to the level of the chest, but you're still in this internally rotated position. The thing that I think frustrates me the most about the exercise is that I have an alternative, and the alternative does the same thing in terms of helping the muscles grow by simply fixing the biomechanics of the exercise, but just allowing the hands to go higher than the elbows. So instead of the elbows being higher than the hand, which drives you into internal rotation, if the elbow is lower than the hand being higher here, I'm in external rotation. And I could do something called a high pull and still get the same abduction of the arm and still get the same benefits of the shoulders, the delts, and the traps without having to undergo any of the stresses that would come from the somewhat awkward movement of an upright row.
And for those listening, we'll put a link to a short clip of what this looks like. But basically what Jeff is doing, and tell me if I'm describing this incorrectly or correctly, Jeff, is taking your two thumbs and pointing behind you and so elbows up kind of near the chin and pointing behind you, like, oh, headed that way, like somebody directing the airplane, like come back.
Yep.
I forget what they call that. I think it's called semaphoring, is the action of like where they direct the planes or something, okay, the flags or whatever. Someone will, of course, tell me I'm wrong about that too, which is why I say these things, because I like being told what the correct answer is. In any case, so this replaces the upright row and probably does a number of other important things as well.
Yeah. Well, again, without naming names or programs or anything like that, when I got involved in Athlete Next, when I first started, my online presence, there was a very, very, very popular program that was out there that I just for fun, I wanted to, as a PT, this is the nerdy things we do, but I wanted to evaluate the workout structure. And I went and I looked at every rep over the course of a week. And there was something like, 890 repetitions or something done. And 0 of them were dedicated to external rotation of the shoulder. So if you think about it, I mean, again, it was a very popular program that was done by a lot of people. There was no focus at all, no dedicated focus towards creating a balance to an action that is so predominant. And remember, it's not just because we sit with bad posture, but the fact that our chest can internally rotate, our lats can internally rotate. There's like other big muscles that participate in things that we do every day that will further internally rotate the shoulder. The only weapons we have for external rotation are those little rotator cuff muscles, and 3 of them, actually 3 of the 4. And the job is to sort of actively and consciously train them through really the boring exercises, right? Like you've seen them with the band. You anchor a band to a pole, you stand with the band in the opposite hand. So if it's anchored to the pole on my left side, I've got the band on my right side. And you see people where they kind of rotate their hand towards the back. Again, kind of what you were saying, but at a lower elevation, taking the back of my hand and trying to point it to somebody behind me. That is one of the ways to train the muscle. It's just one function of the shoulder, external rotation of the shoulder, and you need to do it. And again, it's not that if somebody was doing more external rotation work, could they absorb the upright row better? Probably, because as they elevated the arm, they probably have a little bit more of a contribution from the rotator cuff to what one of the functions is to centralize the head of the humerus inside of the glenoid, the capsule. So as it rises up, it stays central as opposed to migrating up because the deltoid likes to pull up. So if the rotator cuff has some ability to counteract the upward pull of the delt, then it can maintain a more healthy relationship with overhead movement. So just realizing that function is only gained through doing these exercises, we would probably dedicate more time there. But the upright row might be better absorbed by that person because they have a little bit more strength. But again, why? Because if you have an exercise that does the same thing for what you're trying to do muscularly to build the muscles that it affects, why wouldn't you just do it where you can still see and actually pick up more repetitions of external rotation? So you're getting none of the harm, all of the benefits. I see 0 reason to ever do the upright row. And people will argue, this is the way they argue, that I've done this for 30 years and I've never hurt myself. And I always say, yet. Like, hey, listen, the goal is to not hurt yourself ever. So even if it's sort of like, the championship game, you might play the game of your life, but if you lose, you lost. And when you get into the end of the record books, you're still lost. So even if you had the game of your life, you lost. I don't care if you do it for 30 years, no pain, you're still doing it and there's no pain. I'm giving you an option that's going to give you the same results in the exercise that you're seeking. That's why you're doing the exercise, without the possibility of having the bad outcome come from it. So, I get a little bit, defensive of the move, but I feel like it's like, why would you do that?
No, it makes sense. Being able to train for a long period of time and feel good, I'm proud to say, and I don't have the kind of genetics where, like, we don't have a lot of impressive athletes in our family tree or anything. There, some fit individuals, some less fit individuals, but I really believe it's about putting in the work consistently over time. And the more often you can wake up not in pain, the better. And so, I think that being in external rotation as often as possible is good. This is actually a good friend who's a yoga teacher told me this is also a problem with the yogis, all the downward dog stuff. For those listening, you can think of inward rotation as like thumbs down. Mm-hmm. Just think thumbs down, inward rotation isn't bad, but less thumbs down, more thumbs up is external rotation. So for those just listening, maybe that gives a visual. The more exercise you can do in external rotation, the better, it seems, on average. I'd love to chat with you just a little bit more about biomechanics.